Cool. Now let's talk about some general details that I thought it would be fun to share with you guys. Number one is actually from a programming perspective of someone who actually doesn't program. Now, because in the past when I used to work at Oculus and Valve, I was very fortunate. I worked with game engines before. I worked with Unreal for quite a few years when I was at Oculus. And previously, I was very fortunate where like all my team members, I have really fantastic engineers and VFX artists and stuff like that who have already used Unreal for quite a long time. And so when I switched from Unity prototyping into Unreal, it felt amazing. Mostly because felt very enabled with all the graph interfaces that I feel very familiar with. And so I kind of had this opportunity to kind of exercise that kind of muscle, and I had a lot of fun doing it. I made a lot of shaders in the Oculus Rift. And what I find that was interesting was that when you're prototyping, a lot of times you're prototyping in a very strong silo. So you kind of just want to explore this one idea and you kind of explore it very deep. But with games and actual systems is that you have to tie a lot of different pieces together. And what I find is that in general, the hardest thing that I have to overcome, and I don't know if actually a lot of non-programmers is aware of this, is that you have to overcome this issue of knowing where to put your data and your functions. So it's basically just try to get a sense of like where should the information live and how can you get any access to them, because I think in the most object-oriented programming is that the object itself holds a lot of information that might not be accessible for other objects. And so I kind of went through a couple of different phases of like figuring out, okay, like when I refactor this, what is the best approach? And it was very helpful in the sense where Marcos gave me an advice, which is just try to minimize the number of variables to avoid sync issues. And that was something that is particularly problematic in a way where, you know, when I was like kind of designing the AI, there'll be instances where the player characters and the AI would not be entering into the same state together. And that was really hard to manage. And when I was refactoring the AI code, what I did was actually I try to pull out as many variables as possible and collapse the states and just reference whatever that's being accessed in the players so that the AI will behave correctly. Now, obviously, this is not a perfect solution. Even until now, I still see bugs where sometimes the player will enter into battle mode when the guards is actually not in battle mode. But in most cases, it resolves the complexity already. And I think that's something that I learned very deeply, and I'm going to try to be better at it in terms of planning out things so that I don't have that kind of baggage. And I think the next project, I'll definitely be more mindful of it. And then the second thing that is kind of like a fun detail was that again, going on that I'm very lazy theme, is that I don't really like doing repetitive work. And I was dreading with myself. I was like, oh, if I have to do lots of paintings just to fill up the room inside of the gallery, that will be really, really challenging. And what I did at the end was that I was like, oh, maybe what I could do is to just write a shader. So I basically wrote a world space shader that allows a texture to be kind of essentially sliced up into different parts that could be represented in each of the paintings that is spawned in different world location. And that actually worked super well because I didn't want to go through the trouble of actually making each of the paintings unique, especially for all the different levels. But I did want to have a representative style that that particular gallery should have, like whether it is inspired by Noguchi or Rene Magritte or like other places. And so I kind of used that to synthesize a way to have a holistic visual style in the paintings themselves that's on the wall without doing too much work. And that worked out really well, and I was super happy about it. And then another thing that I actually worked on that I was pretty intrigued by was that it's funny because part of the inspiration of Lucid Heist was actually the fact that ever since the quarantine, I've been dreaming a lot more, and it's been a very fascinating experience in terms of like how I think about things when I wake up and I'm like, oh wow, I didn't really anticipate this to be happening, or the things that got pierced together doesn't make a lot of sense, but yet it's still fascinating for me to hear. And when I was designing the main menu, I was trying to figure out ways to make it more interesting, but at the same time, I want the players to know that they're in a different place. And so I initially it was like a tile design, similar to the galleries, but I decided to switch over to make an infinite map. So when I say infinite, there's a lot of air quoting here because it's actually just a fixed tile size. But what I do is that I teleport the player back into on the other side of the tile so that it gives the illusion that they're just continuously running infinitely in the same space and always arrive back into the original location so they don't get lost, but at the same time they have the freedom of movement. And that part was particularly fun to do because I think that there are certain instances where I had to deal with like conflicts and things like that, but overall it was fairly easy to execute on, and I'm looking forward to making something more like this. Also, I think that there are like kind of more kind of playful ways to stylize that experience. But yeah, I think that that's pretty much all that I have in mind in terms of things that I've done. Obviously, there's tons of other stuff that goes on. And I've been kind of lazy for the last 2 weeks in terms of documenting what I've done, but I thought that it would be kind of good to let you guys know that I actually did a mini devlog that I try to do on a day-to-day basis when I kind of like work on this project and kind of record what I learned, and also all the resources. So I'll put the link down below in case you guys want to get access to it. But and that's actually a very good general tip actually. So I think one of the hardest thing about working on these kinds of bigger projects as a after hour initiative is that it takes a lot of motivation to try to get this done, and I know that I'm someone where if I don't finish it as soon as possible, it's never going to be done. And I try to make myself a little bit more disciplined by forcing myself that at least every single day I need to make some progress. Like sometimes I would just like make a single model and then call it a day, and I don't really want to work on it. And then there are days where I'm like super productive and I just make tons of changes, refactor the code and things like that. But overall, I always try to make something every single day just to keep myself like excited and keep the momentum going. And I think that's super important in terms of just like forcing yourself to be more disciplined about like how you want to go about doing this. And then I think, yeah, that's pretty much it. Cool. Now let's talk about the last topic, which is game trailer. I didn't really anticipate this to be a topic at first when I was thinking about making this progress video, but I was just cutting the game trailer and I thought that it would be good to actually chat a little bit about my experience with creating game trailer. Now, I am a designer by trade, and I have always leaned a lot on motions to communicate kind of my designs. But what I find is actually making game trailers is super hard because there's so many nuances that I can't have full control. With designs and UI, it tends to be a lot more clean and there's a lot more things that I can control. But then with games where there is like AIs and like, guests would just like sometimes cover up the action when I thought, oh, this is going to be a great shot, and it ended up not to be. There's a lot of complexity there, and I realized I have to plan that a lot more further ahead. There's a couple of things that I particularly find strategies that I used when I was capturing the game trailer, and it came from this GDC talk that I watched, and I put the link down below. It was super interesting to see like, how the speaker kind of think about the different ways of situating the camera and thinking about like how to make edits better. And, to be honest, I think that like you kind of have to be really good at playing the game, I feel like, if you were to make game trailers in general. And one of the things that I learned was just trying to make sure that I remove all the UI and help text when I'm actually recording the game trailer. And then what I also did was that a lot of the work around kind of like chasing the guards and stylizing them and giving them emphasis on different things, I have a kind of like a list of things that I feel like will be useful for people to know and see. For example, when I decided to program the slippery floor patch, I really wanted to showcase like, even though it seems like it's a disadvantage for the player where they'll slip and change direction quite dramatically, but the same actually applies for the guards, and you could potentially use it to your advantage to get rid of the guards and change their momentum as well. So I wanted to capture that. It took a couple of takes, but overall it worked out, so that was really good. And then another thing that I had to consider was also like in terms of the audio experience, because in-game there is like dynamic audio that's playing, but I think that when you're doing the game trailer, it was actually much better to just edit it outside inside Premiere Pro to figure out how to tie the whole things together. And I thought that that was really useful. And then also just try to record as high of a resolution as possible, because there are going to be moments where you have to reframe and scale your footages, so that you can basically focus more in the action scene. Because sometimes, like, you know, when you're playing games, it's a very different experience than watching someone playing a game, because what the player knows when they're playing versus what the audience know when they're watching is quite different. And so I think it's very important to call out like what you should be focusing on. And I was really hoping for ways to make it better. And I think that next time when I do a game trailer, hopefully it will be better as well. And yeah. Okay. Cool. Thanks so much for listening. This is actually a pretty long video, I think. But I hope you enjoyed it. And let me know if you have any questions. Pretty much every single thing that I reference in this video is going to be listed down below. So if you need additional help or you have additional thoughts, definitely ping me. And also, obviously, the game to download, the link is actually down there as well. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope that this was useful for you. And also, I did want to mention this. So, you know, I think some of you who have been following me knows that like I go by the name Egg Badger, and it has been, I really enjoy that. It actually came from a joke with some friends about honey badger and how I like eggs better. And anyways, it's a long story. And I recently switched my Twitter handle into Agatha Yu because I'm planning to switch my kind of artist portfolio into something that's a little bit different. And it's going to be called Kind of Fiction. And Kind of Fiction is basically going to be an entity that I use to focus on characters and worlds that I build out. And it's going to extend across different forms and as well as mediums. So it could go from print all the way to kind of game experiences. And Lucid Heist is kind of like the first tester that I have for this concept. And I hope you guys enjoy it. And on the Twitter account for Kind of Fiction, I'm going to share a lot more interesting character-driven things, as well as taking advantage of like, you know, all the different resources that I bump into in Twitter, and give you guys a glimpse of things that I find interesting. And yeah, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys stay safe and stay healthy.